Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be going through all of the beginner common mistakes for blending colored pencils. And the first thing that I'm going to do is talk through all of the mistakes when using solvent to blend. And then we're going to be talking about the mistakes using the burnishing method. So anyway guys, let's get into it. Over the years, I have definitely had a lot of people ask me, why does solvent not work for me? It never looks how you get it to look in your videos. And there are definitely a few very common reasons why solvent might not be working for you to blend out your colored pencil. And the first one may simply be because you are not actually applying enough pigment down to the paper before you go and blend using your solvent. Now let me show you what it'd look like if you wasn't applying enough pigment down to the paper. And this is a very, very common beginner mistake. You can see that I'm adding some pigment and I am going over it a few times, but nowhere near as much as I did the first time. And you can't really expect it to blend out really nice and smooth and get rid of all of the graininess if there simply isn't enough pigment to actually blend in the first place. I'm using the Zest pencil blend to blend both of these out, and I'm using a cotton bud, but you could also use a paintbrush if you wanted. And you can see with the top one, I'm just going in circular motions and you can really see how nicely it is blending that out. And I'm going to repeat that process and do the exact same thing with the bottom one, and you'll very quickly see that it looks a lot streakier. It remains quite grainy, and you can see a lot of the solvent, that grey sort of look. And if you are seeing that grey look of the solvent where it's sinking into the paper because there is not enough pigment on top to stop it sinking through, then that is when you know that you simply haven't got enough pigment down. So the next thing that you want to avoid doing is adding too much solvent. This can give you that sort of stain around your artwork, which can be very, very frustrating. So once again, I'm going to create two swatches, and this time they're going to be exactly the same. Here are our two identical swatches, and I'm going in firstly with some solvent on my cotton bud, and this has got just the right amount. So I dipped it into my Zest pencil blend, and then I used some tissue just to blot off the excess. And I'm going to go and blend this exactly the same as we did with our other two swatches. And it's always better to go in with a little bit less and need to go in and add a bit more solvent than go in and add too much. And if you add the right amount of solvent, you won't get it bleeding and staining out all around the edges of your drawing. Now moving on to our second swatch, I dipped my cotton bud into the solvent again, but this time I did not dab off any of the excess solvent with my tissue. And you're going to see the difference this will make. So it may blend it out a little bit faster, but you can already see the staining it's creating around the edge of our swatch of coloured pencil. So you can see on the top one there's no staining or bleeding whatsoever, but on the bottom one you can see how much it's bled out, and this won't really go away as it dries. So the next mistake that I want to talk about is not using the right tools to blend out your colored pencil with solvent. So as you know, I like to use cotton buds quite often to blend out my colored pencil with solvent, but I also like to use brushes. But a mistake that I see people making is not using the right type of brushes to blend out their colored pencils. Recently I did this horse eye drawing using colored pencil and solvent to blend, and for example I wouldn't want to use this tiny detailed brush to try and blend out all of the fur, because that would take me forever and wouldn't get the smoothest result. Instead, it would be a lot better to use this flat brush that is a lot larger and would get the job done a lot quicker. But for example, I might want to use my tiny detailed brush for little areas within the eye. As you can see, this small strip of blue. If I didn't want to smudge and get this colour all muddy with the brown, I could use a tiny detail brush just to blend out tiny specific areas or highlights. But it's definitely not the best idea to use that to blend out large areas of a colour. Another type of mistake I see people making with brushes, like I said, is using the wrong type. So you wouldn't really want to use this fluffy brush to blend out the colored pencil because it's not stiff enough and it just won't really work. What I do recommend is using filbert brushes or flat brushes like this that are a lot sturdier and are just stronger to actually blend out with. So overall, make sure you're using the right type of brush and also the right sized brush depending on the areas you're blending out. Another reason why solvent may not be working out for you is because you might not be using the right type of paper for your colored pencil drawings when you're blending with solvent. So this paper here is my absolute favorite to use when I'm using solvent, and this is the Arches watercolor paper, and I use the hot press version because this has got a smoother finish than the cold pressed. And so this is really good because it is watercolor paper, which means when you apply the solvent, which is wet, it can handle a wet medium on top of it. So this works really, really well. And also because it is watercolor paper, it does have a bit more tooth to it and texture, so it can really grip and hold on to lots of layers of colored pencil. Now, one paper that I use a lot for colored pencil drawings, but definitely not for my actual solvent work, is this paper here, and this is the Strathmore Bristol Smooth Paper. And you'll see I've mentioned this a lot throughout my videos here when I do my colored pencil videos. This is one of my favorites, but the reason I wouldn't use this for solvent is because this is a smooth surface and it is very, very smooth and slick. And so what happens is the solvent just kind of lies on top. It will keep mixing around. It doesn't really absorb into the paper at all. The paper's not meant to have a wet medium on top of it. And so it just sort of slides around on top of the paper, and it doesn't work well with additional layers on top and blending with solvent multiple times. What I would recommend is a watercolor paper or a paper that's meant to be able to handle a wet medium to it, and also a paper that has got a little bit of tooth and texture. It doesn't have to be really rough like the cold press paper, but something that allows you to layer lots of the colored pencil and blend multiple times. Those are all of the mistakes for using a solvent to blend your colored pencils. And now before we get on to the burnishing method, I just want to let you guys know that if you do want to see lots of real-time tutorials and really improve your drawing and painting skills, then over on my Patreon, I have got over 200 real-time tutorials with voiceover where I go through all of my techniques for colored pencil work, charcoal work, watercolor paintings, all of that stuff. I teach you how to draw portraits, animal studies, and lots of other objects as well. And you can really build confidence with the techniques that I use on a day-to-day basis with my drawings. For a small amount per month, you will get instant access to all of the tutorials I have ever created on my Patreon, and there is hundreds of hours worth of footage for you to follow along with on there. And you'll also get access to new tutorials that I upload every month. If you are interested and want to check it out, then I will leave a link at the top of the description box so you can head over and really see what my Patreon has to offer. But now let's get on to all of the mistakes that I see beginners make when they're trying to use the burnishing method. The first mistake when trying to use the burnishing method is pressing too hard straight away. So for example, if I was to try right now to actually merge some orange in with a bit of pink, you'll see if I press as hard as I possibly can straight away, it makes it very hard for you to actually blend the colours together. Plus you can see that it very easily breaks your pencil doing it this way as well. And this is very common, so don't worry if you are doing this. But when you get over to the orange, it makes it harder to get a really nice transition. And you often get a really messy look because there's so much coloured pencil on the paper. But now if I was to go in and blend those same colours together, but start off a lot lighter and really build up to actually burnishing the two colours together, then it will create not only a softer blend and more of a natural transition, but you won't have any chunkiness, and it also means that you have more time to actually fix any mistakes. And that's the main sort of benefit of doing it this way, is that you're not rushing into things. Also, you will notice that I often like to rotate my pencil just to keep it sharper for longer. You'll see the most benefits of using this technique. For example, if you were drawing a portrait where with the skin, there's lots of different colors that make up the skin. And so if you went really hard with the first color straight away, then the paper won't be able to accept all those other colors. and then the skin would look a bit flatter. And there you go, you can see that the bottom one is a lot smoother and it's more of a gradual transition, whereas this one, it's more of a clean cut-off point in the middle between the pink and the orange, whereas with this one, it's much more of a gradual change. The next mistake that a lot of beginners make when they start off with the burnishing technique is using messy shading. If you're holding your pencil more towards the front, then it's harder to get a really consistent pressure, because even the slight changes of pressure with your hand are going to be very, very obvious if you're holding it really close to the front. Whereas if you hold it further back, then it's a lot easier to get really smooth shading. So let me show you guys what I mean. When you hold it more towards the front, even if you try to be nice and even, you'll still get those little strokes that are a bit darker than the others. And it might not be a drastic difference, but just things like this are going to make it so much harder when you burnish this out to actually get a really nice, smooth result. So I'm going to layer a few different colours, and if you apply the first layer like this and you get a few of those strokes showing through, it can be really, really difficult. And you might not even be applying much pressure. I'm not applying loads of pressure, but it still happens. So now if I was to layer a darker blue over the top of this, again, you'll see that even though I'm trying my hardest to be really consistent with the pressure, you will get a few of those lines that are very, very obvious. Okay, so now I'm going to repeat the exact same process, but instead of holding it towards the front, I'm going to hold it much further back, and I'm going to repeat the same process. And you'll see that the actual shading, even though it will start off being a lot lighter because you're not applying as much pressure, it is a lot more consistent. You don't get any real harsh lines showing through. And subtle things like this are going to be key to getting that really smooth look. Now I'm going to switch back over to that blue, hold it further towards the back, and repeat that same process. Very lightly go in oval motions, big oval motions, and it lays down so much smoother on top of the purple as well when everything's a lot more consistent. And you can see with this swatch down here that you can't see any of those blue and purple lines going vertically down. It's a lot smoother. The next mistake that I see people make when they're using the burnishing method, and for me, I think this is the most important and the biggest mistake that I see people make, is when they're blending out, going in the same direction as you actually applied your initial layers of colour pencil, gives you a much messier look. And so let me show you what I mean. I'm going to actually be very intentionally messy with this, so you can really see the difference. And with this first one, I'm going to go in the same direction as I applied those strokes. So I'm going to go with the strokes. So as you can see, it's not ultra smooth. You can still see some of the streakiness. Now I'm going to repeat that same process, but I'm going to go horizontally, and you'll see how much smoother this looks. And the reason this looks smoother is because you're actually going against the direction, so it helps to blur and smudge out these lines. You can see how this section of colored pencil looks a lot smoother, a lot more of a solid color without any of that vertical streakiness. And I was very hard at the start, I was very messy. So think about how this would turn out if you actually applied the initial shading in the right way and didn't have all those messy pencil strokes. It really does help to get an ultra smooth finish. Whereas you can see with this one, I did the exact same thing, but I went vertically. And you can see what a big difference just tweaking the direction you actually blend out is on the final result. So the final mistake that I want to talk about in this video is if you are a beginner and you're trying to graduate from one color into another, what you don't want to do is just blend all the way using the same amount of pressure all the way across and then stop and then pick up your darker pink and go in and apply a lot of pressure again in the same amount of pressure all the way across. There's a very abrupt stop. It's not a very soft transition. So if you do want a soft gradient, start with quite a lot of pressure over on the left hand side and then very quickly lighten and lighten your pressure as you go over towards where you want it to be darker until you're barely applying any of the color over on the right hand side. And then go and do the exact same thing with your darker pink. And over on the right hand side, you're going to be applying more pressure and then slowly ease out of that pressure until you're hardly applying any pressure over on this side. And you can see how this has a much softer and gradual change over into that dark pink, whereas this one has a much more abrupt stop. You can literally pinpoint where it changes, whereas with this one, it's so nice and gradual that you can't pinpoint an exact point where the colour is changing. And that's what you're aiming for if you want a nice soft blend. Anyway guys, that is it for this video. I really do hope you enjoyed it. Remember, if you are interested in real-time tutorials, then you can head over to my Patreon and learn more about what I have to offer over on there. If you did enjoy the video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you're new around here, and tick that bell icon so that you do get notified on my future uploads. But that is it from me, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye everybody.